Back, everybody. We hope you had a great lunch. Again, I want to thank you all for being here today. Obviously, you care very much about the environment and global warming. So right now, we're going to be joined by Dr. John Foley in just a moment. But if you are just joining us, if you missed any of this morning's segments, they are going to be posted on our website, thenestsummit.com. So make sure you check back in a couple of days. Thursday is when they're going to be posted, and you can always watch them there. Now, this next panel, we're going to be talking about food, how it's grown, how it's consumed, how it's not consumed, what happens to what we grow that is not used. Starting things off for us again, we'd like to welcome back Dr. Jonathan Foley, the Executive Director of Project Drawdown. He joins us again via Zoom, and Dr. Foley will give us an overview of agriculture and why it accounts for 24% of our greenhouse gases. So without further ado, Dr. Jonathan Foley, welcome back.
Thank you, and thanks for having me back today. Yeah, I wanted to just give a bit of an overview to help kind of prime the conversation about how important it is that we address food and agriculture and land use as part of our climate solutions portfolio. We tend to think about fossil fuels as kind of the only thing that's causing climate change. That's not really true. Fossil fuels, all of them, whether it's electricity or cars or homes, are about 62% of climate change. The other 40% or so are other things, including the biggest part would be food, agriculture, and land use. So we have to kind of think about a lot of things, including fossil fuels, but also the food system. And we have to think about the food system because it's just so massive. Here are pictures of farms from outer space, whether it's in the Midwest of the US, like Minnesota and Kansas, or here are these kind of village farming landscapes in Germany, or rainforests being cleared in Bolivia, or rice terraces in Thailand, or soybean fields in Brazil. Agriculture now covers an extraordinary percentage of the Earth's surface. In fact, it is the largest ecosystem on Earth, is food. The green areas in this map are areas where we grow crops, the kind of plant-based part of our diet, but also a lot of that's being sent to animals and cars. And the tan areas are where we grow animals as grazing animals in our pastures and rangelands. But together, agriculture now covers about 40% of all the land on Earth. That's 40% of all the land there ever was, there ever is going to be, and that's it. And what's basically left are the deserts, the high northern regions, and the rainforest are the last places that haven't really been converted to widespread agriculture across the world. So this is pretty important. One of the things that's really, really interesting, though, is that 75% of all that land, all the land that is used for growing food on Earth, 75% of it is devoted to growing animals, either as grazing land for the animals or crops that we grow and then feed to animals, especially things like soybeans and corn and other kind of animal feeds. So the first order, Earth is very cultivated, and the second order, it's mostly for animals. The environmental impact of this is extraordinary, of course. I mean, first of all, we're going to be clearing rainforest and other areas as we expand our agricultural footprint, having an impact on biodiversity directly and on forest directly, even before we talk about climate change. We also know that water resources are used for agriculture in huge amounts. 70% of the water we use around the planet is used for one thing, to irrigate our fields. And irrigation can lead to the collapse of water resources, whether it's the Agabuela Aquifer in the Midwest, part of the Colorado River, parts of California, or here, the Aral Sea, where before even climate change became an issue, we collapsed the Aral Sea by overtaxing it, by taking too much water away from it for irrigating the deserts of Kazakhstan. So we've caused severe water stress from agriculture as well. Agriculture, especially the use of fertilizers and overuse of fertilizers like nitrogen and phosphorus compounds, also is polluting our freshwater and marine environments. We even now have large kind of dead zones, so-called hypoxic zones at the mouth of a lot of the major rivers of the world, where too much fertilizer is emptying into the ocean, causing them to choke on weeds, essentially. So those are some of the well-known impacts of how we do agriculture in the environment today, but also just to remind us, it's a significant contributor to climate change. Now, earlier this morning, some of you might have seen me give a different presentation where I mentioned this diagram where it shows basically where the key sources of climate change pollution are coming from, but also what happens to those gases later as they mix through the atmosphere. But here in the sources, we see that electricity and food are roughly tied as the two biggest contributors to climate change sources. That is, electricity production produces about 25% of our greenhouse gases. Agriculture, food, and land use together produce around 24 directly. It turns out that agriculture can also be important in what are called carbon sinks. Carbon sinks are things that naturally or maybe artificially remove carbon from the atmosphere. Right now, nature is doing all of this. About 40% of our greenhouse gases are naturally removed by forest and by oceans. But if we can change the way we farm, we might be able to make those a little thicker arrows and put away carbon even in our agricultural soils and farmlands. That would be a pretty neat trick. So agriculture and land use have a role to play on both sides of this equation by reducing the sources of pollution, but also maybe by enhancing the removal of pollution later on. So this is pretty important. We need to bring the sources of greenhouse gases to zero. That includes agriculture, and we'll have to look at where those come from, but also support the kind of sinks that might be out there in the natural world and maybe those in the working landscapes of the world to see if we can make them stronger. So if we want to reduce the sources, we have to look at food and agriculture, and that's total about 24% of our emissions today. But deforestation, methane from animals, and fertilizer use are the three big contributors under the hood. Lots of other things add to this mix in the last 5%, but the top three things that cause greenhouse gases from agriculture, land use, and food is deforestation, mainly tropical forests to grow more beef, more animal feed, more palm oil, more timber, but also animals themselves, and a little bit from rice fields producing methane. Cows, for example, burp methane, and that's a powerful, powerful greenhouse gas, which definitely contributes to climate change alongside other things. And then finally, nitrous oxide from fertilizer use and manure. When we put too much fertilizer or manure in a farmer's field, sometimes the nitrogen in the fertilizer mixes with air and water, becomes nitrous oxide going into the air, adding to climate change. So those are the big kind of sources. In order to address the sources, we could do a couple of things. One, we could use less food and waste less of it by reducing food waste, which is about 30 to 40% of all the food that's lost on Earth, or grown on Earth, that is lost. We could certainly do better there. But also in many parts of the world, not all, we could dial down our meat consumption somewhat and free up a lot of resources. It doesn't mean everybody has to become a vegan, but we could shift to more plant-rich diets in some parts of the world, would free up a lot of land and a lot of resources and cut a lot of emissions in the process. We can also protect ecosystems like rainforests from being cleared, and we can farm better on the lands we have so they emit less from the soils that they're on, especially in terms of fertilizer use and nutrients. But we can also turn working lands, maybe like their forests nearby, into carbon sinks. To do that, to create new sinks on land, we have to not only protect, but also restore ecosystems that have been cleared already. Restoring tropical forests could be very important, for example, and temperate forest. That would be a huge, huge plus of adding new carbon sinks. We could also farm differently on the farms we have, deploying things like managed grazing, regenerative cropping, regenerative agriculture more generally, agroforestry, silvopasture, a whole bunch of different things here on crops, on pastures, in mixed kind of forest crop systems. All of those could be very important and create new carbon sinks. And finally, we could look at degraded lands that used to be in agriculture, but were so petered out that they're now abandoned. Can we even bring those back to health with different agricultural practices and land use practices? Yes, we probably can. So if we put all this together, agriculture is going to be part of reducing sources. All the green stuff is going to be important to look at, and also in supporting sinks that currently don't exist. So if I look at the role of agriculture, land use, and food, I see a huge opportunity for reducing sources of greenhouse gases, especially by cutting food waste, shifting diets, protecting ecosystems, and farming better. But also long-term, the possibility of adding more carbon sinks on our working lands using regenerative and conservation agriculture techniques. So to reduce primary emissions, again, food waste and diets are crucial. Reducing deforestation, cutting methane, and doing better with fertilizers are all important. But also food solutions can protect and enhance the sinks of carbon by protecting agricultural systems, and practicing regenerative practices wherever we can.
Yeah, exactly.
Regenerative ag has been very, very exciting lately. A lot of interesting breakthroughs here. It could be extremely helpful. But I just want to caution, this does not replace cutting emissions. And we always have to be careful what happens to the carbon we leave in the soil and how long it'll stay there and under what conditions. Finally, looking deeper, if you want to go to our website at drawdown.org, there's a much deeper report about agriculture and climate solutions called Farming Our Way Out of the Climate Crisis. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. And I hope in this panel and other places, we get to continue to learn from each other and share what we learn so that we can find these solutions both to the food system, but also to climate change in making the world much, much better. So thank you very much. And I hope you have a great rest of the conference today. Thank you.